special episode with Dr. John Mark Miravalle on his book Beauty, What It Is and Why It Matters today on The Simple Truth. We consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of St. Joseph. Our guest today is Dr. John Mark Miravalle, Catholic husband and father, professor of systematic and moral theology at Mount St. Mary's Seminary in Maryland, seminary.msmary.edu. Let's get that website out there. He's also the author of several books, including Thinking Clearly, Catholic Philosophy for a Culture in Chaos, How to Feel Good and How Not to, The Ethics of Using Marijuana, Alcohol, Antidepressants, and Other Mood-Altering Drugs, and also the book we're going to be diving into today, Beauty, What It Is and Why It Matters. You can get that one by going to SophiaInstitute.com. We were very blessed to have him with us last week to share some of his personal testimony, including an introduction into some of his good work. But today, we're blessed to have him back to dive deep into beauty. Dr. John Mark Miravalle, welcome back to The Simple Truth. Thank you for coming back. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Jim.
Yes, yeah. As I was sharing with you just before the show, it's kind of, I got to keep myself under control here. So excited for this interview because as I encounter the good work that you're doing, I'm just blown away by it, so impressed and just so happy that it exists, that what you've put out here in these books, and very excited to dive into it today and ask you some questions on it. Just so incredibly helpful. I'm sure that many other people are going to find it that way as well. But I guess first, big picture, and I think this is where I get so excited. I think there's a big picture where we're very much aligned here. It seems that you seem to be seeking to know reality because you want to live it. You want to live in accordance with reality. You're not just looking to know something. You're looking to live something. And if we want to raise the bar in how we're living, we need to raise the bar in how we're thinking, not in some esoteric way, but in a way that is quite simple, quite focused on what is objectively true, good, and beautiful, and living accordingly. And this is why you're Catholic. You believe that Jesus and his Catholic Church are real. They are objectively true, good, and beautiful. And so you want to live accordingly, corresponding to the objective truth, goodness, and beauty of our human nature. Maybe I've only described myself in that description, but I think maybe I've described you too. Anything that you'd want to add or subtract from any of that?
No, I subscribe to that completely. I'm on board. I'm with you. It doesn't make too much sense to try to be faced with the lock of human existence and not even bother looking for the key. I mean, this is what opens up life, is when we find what is the structure of everything to which our being corresponds, and then you unlock everything. Like I said, you find the purpose and you can go for it.
Yeah. So I think we're going to have a bit of order to this. We're going to get through, I think, the first section of your book on beauty here. As you say, there's some overlap, but the basic structure of the book is in three parts. One, the nature of beauty, beauty in general. Two, man-made beauty, different forms of man-made beauty and the artists who dedicate themselves to creating it. And three, beauty and the supernatural beauty, and how the arts help us to appreciate the beauty of God, the saints, and the liturgy. This is also rich. I've got so many pages of notes going through this book and just wearing it out because there's just so much richness and so many new things to find. Just one thought leads to the next. It's wonderful. And so really focusing, I think, on this first section today. And we'd love to have you back to maybe break down the next two sections. But this first section, the nature of beauty, beauty in general. So we're going to kind of go through this today. But even outside of the order of it all, let's start off with a little surprise. And this is, as I was reading, really this is kind of like the end point for me. And one of the conclusions that I find in reading through this, what it helps me to form together based on how I see reality. And so I want to lay this out and just get your response to it, sort of not just from this book, but from just what is in your mind generally, in your full formation. But again, a lot of this, I think, flows from what I'm learning from this book on beauty. So I think let's put it this way. So this is what the foreword in the book on beauty, Bishop Provost writes the following. He says, the basic thesis throughout this book is that recognizing the goodness of things and taking delight in that goodness, and we can also use other words for delight if somebody prefers a different word, a synonym like pleasure, gladness, happiness. That's what we're getting at here. Taking delight in that goodness is a core moral obligation. And so it seems to be an obligation of justice to see the objective truth of the goodness before us and to be proportionately grateful. And so on the flip side, I ask this, is recognizing the corruption or the abuse of the goodness of things and taking displeasure or disgust in that corruption of goodness, is that a core moral obligation? Just as we have your book, Beauty, What It Is and Why It Matters, could we have a corresponding book about the corruption of beauty, Ugly, What It Is and Why It Matters? And then this third point, then to recognize the goodness of our fighting to protect and defend, to push back the evil, and to take delight in doing it, as where we can kind of land on this. And so only if that first part exists, that goodness of things, do we get those second parts about the corruption of that goodness, and then our fight to really protect that goodness or bring forth that goodness, push back the evil. So that goodness of things is the baseline. And then that next part is the conflict. And then really that last part about seeing it all and fighting to protect and to live that life. That's really the life that we're called to. So in eternity, our lives will be all either the first thing, the total goodness of things, or the total corruption of the goodness of things in hell, so heaven or hell. But now we're called to be rooted in that first thing, in that goodness, sensitive to the corruption of that goodness, and faithfully living out the fighting for that goodness, for the defense of goodness, and fighting to push back the evil. Is that a kind of a right way to see who we are and where we are in the whole grand scope of things?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful framing. That's a great engagement with the themes. I love it. Here's one proviso I put in there, though, that the negation, the primary failure, I would suggest, is actually not primarily the attack on goodness. That's a perversion, absolutely. But I would suggest maybe that the prior and more fundamental failure is the lack of appreciation of goodness. So in other words, step one, we're absolutely right. We are supposed to delight and enjoy, take pleasure in what is true and good. And in fact, that's what, as you say, we will be doing for eternity. So if you're not practicing doing that now, you're not practicing for heaven. You're not getting yourself actually ready or fit for heaven. So the first danger then is actually not that we're going to attack or pervert the good. The first danger is just that we won't appreciate it. So I worry sometimes that a lot of faithful Catholics, they recognize the true and the good, but then they get so sort of fascinated or locked in or even anxious or fearful about the ugliness in the world and the perversion in the world. And yes, there's plenty of it. That actually they forget and they fall into that first fundamental failure, which is lack of appreciation. So in other words, what am I saying? I'm just saying, yeah, we should have revulsion. We should have an anger, actually, and a willingness to fight evil and to fight perversion. But that's very secondary to our primary obligation, which is to delight and to rest in what is true, good, and beautiful. So sometimes I worry that our culture warrior instincts make us so busy fighting evil that we actually never spend time resting in the good. And that's a great loss to our humanity and our happiness.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree. We've got to be rooted in that goodness and rightly responding to that goodness. And in fact, that's the only way I think we're going to be effective in fighting these battles that we're called to fight in this earthly life. I think... Well, instead of getting into another topic, just anything else that you would want to add to that before we hit the break?
No, I love that. I love this idea. This is a fundamental moral obligation. to enjoy. And so if you do not have the discipline of delight, which takes practice, then you need to get working on it. Because there are a lot of people and they're trying to serve the Lord, they're trying to be good Christians, but they have not cultivated a discipline of delight, a discipline of gratitude, a habit, the skill, the art of appreciation. And as you said, if we ourselves are not happy, we are not going to be able to combat effectively the unhappiness of the secular world.
Yeah, I have found there's the writings of certain saints that I don't know if they're probably different for different people, but for me, Saint Bernard, his commentary on the Song of Songs is a good example. And I've never gotten past the first volume because, again, it's so rich. I can just sit with that and sit with a line or two of that or a paragraph and just, it stops me. I can rest in the beauty of what he is putting forth, the goodness of what he is putting forth, the way that he sees the Catholic faith, the way that he sees our Lord Jesus and how we are called to live. And he just puts it forth in a way that makes it very clear, makes it very beautiful, and makes that goodness very apparent. And then what does that do? That forms us, that forms our hearts, forms our minds. So maybe we'll let John Mark respond to that when we get back. Maybe there's a particular saint whose writings have affected him in that way, or if he thinks of it the same way. We're going to be right back with much more. I'm excited. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Dr. John Mark Miravalle as our guest, talking about his book, Beauty, what it is and why it matters. You can get it at sophiainstitute.com, sophiainstitute.com. So we'll start off with that question right at the end of that last break. Any particular saint whose writings are helpful to you or have been helpful to you to help you to even begin to cultivate that sense of the beauty of things, the goodness of things, the truth of things in a way that really started to open up and form your own heart and mind in that way?
So, so many like you. I love the commentary on A Song of Songs. There's so much. The thing that comes to mind right now is St. John Newman. Even though sometimes he can be a bit of a downer, has a beautiful reflection on present blessings, and it's such a powerful exercise in gratitude. And he just brings to mind things that we take for granted, like sleep, like the fact that eating gives us pleasure, whereas it might give us pain and then we'd have to do it anyway. Or the fact that it's easy to fulfill our religious obligations, even though if it weren't easy, we'd have to do it anyway. And he just goes through this long, long list of how good things are and how much we have to be grateful for. That's the first thing that comes to mind for a recent saint writing that I've read recently that I felt really connected with this discipline of delight, appreciation, gratitude, and rest.
Yeah, I think this helps break it open some more, what you write in chapter 1 here, the chapter of beauty, virtue, and the passions. You say, quote, "You can know the truth and not feel anything. You can choose the good and not feel anything. But you're not having an aesthetic experience. You're not appreciating beauty unless you feel something." End of quote. So you seem to be saying that we are wise to cultivate a habit of seeing the truth as beautiful and seeing goodness as beautiful, and therefore cultivate a proper emotional response. For example, if one is going into Mass only focused on the truth of what he's walking into versus going in focused on the truth of it, but also the beauty of it, he's going to have a different emotional response. In a similar way, if one is serving another person in need and they only see the goodness of doing so versus one who also sees the beauty of doing so, it's a different experience. Can you speak to us further on this?
Yeah, an awful lot. So one of the distinctive features of Catholic moral theology is that we believe that the passions of the soul, or our feelings, our emotions, are designed by God, and part of our salvation and part of the Christian life is cultivating the right feelings at the right time. So, for instance, if somebody says, listen, you can't help how you feel, the Catholic Church, following the theology of St. Thomas Aquinas, but it's in the Catechism now, says, yes, you can, and you have to. You have to engage in practices that will change your feelings. You should feel delight for what is good. And as you pointed out, you should feel aversion, repulsion for what is evil. And there are techniques that you can use for doing this. And one of the most powerful techniques is using the imagination, which is where art comes in so strongly. But there's other forms, there's other techniques, because God doesn't just want us to know him conceptually, and he doesn't just want us to serve him volitionally. He wants us to delight in him. He wants us to enjoy him and everything that he has done. And that takes work. So if you thought all that mattered was your orthodoxy or your following the commandments, you have to know that God expects more of you. He wants you to work on how you feel too.
Yeah. Any, I guess, just practical advice on that for somebody to, I guess, take that from the theoretical and really put it into practice. Is there a simple way you would teach somebody to do this?
Yeah. So again, the Catechism following Aquinas gives two ways: commanding the feelings and checking the feelings. Checking the feelings is easy. It's just behavioral. It's fake it till you make it. If you go on a jog every morning, eventually you'll go from hating it to wanting it. If you do the right thing enough, you'll get to where you like it. And if you don't do the wrong thing enough, like if you go 2 years and you surround yourself with people who don't cuss, and then you go play a pickup basketball game where the blasphemy is so horrendous, you expect the basketball court to just open up and swallow you all, eventually you'll be shocked. And that's what you want. You want to be shocked and repulsed by evil. So one is just habitual, faking it till you're making it, do the right thing. The other is be very diligent in the images that you cultivate, your imagination. So for instance, if you are watching filth all day, violence, dysfunction, certainly pornography, that is going to affect the way you feel, because we are creatures whose feelings are mostly prompted by our images, by our mental images. Whereas if you have a beautiful image of Our Lady, I have an image, I gave it to someone recently, I have an image of St. Joseph guarding watch over Mary and Jesus while they sleep. And that image makes me so happy to be a father. It makes me so glad to be a man. It makes me so averse to sins of the flesh, which are opposed to that image that I find delightful. So find good images and continue in good behaviors, and your feelings will eventually, over a long period of time, get in line.
Yeah, and I want to get into what you're actually. Let's just go there right now, because you write asceticism, and this is a mouthful to try to pronounce. Asceticism is a prerequisite to aestheticism. You write that sin and selfishness spoil beauty. Vice kills appreciation. Only the innocence born of self-control keeps the world fresh and glimmering. And even if you're not indulging in something directly sinful, too much sensory stimulation can blind you to the deeper realities, latent, insensible realities. So please, again, explain more on this so we can basically be setting ourselves up for failure in this way, just by cultivating bad habits in the way that we are allowing this sensory stimulation to blind us, and obviously the way sin blinds us. But anything more on this you can share with us?
Sure. So you can think of a couple examples. I think food is one of the easiest. I remember when I was a kid, after Halloween, I ate bags and bags of candy corn, and I made myself sick, and I didn't enjoy eating anything for the next 2 days. Alcoholics famously cannot enjoy a glass of wine. They cannot enjoy its fine properties because their need and their fixation makes it impossible for them to really appreciate what the sophisticated pleasure, the sophisticated quality of what they're drinking. Certainly in lust, pornography leads to impotence. Why? Because you so saturate yourself in overstimulation that eventually you can no longer respond to beauty. So we have all these cases of where if you don't exercise self-control, you will actually lose the delight of beauty. So step one is to say, what am I overindulging in? What do I need to back off of so that I can actually appreciate more?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's really this element of simplicity that perhaps in former times, in cultures that weren't so so depraved and so stimulated, this would have been more natural to the process of living. But now we've got to think a lot more about this and sort of have a game plan that maybe would not have been as necessary before. So that's, again, why this work is so valuable, because if we're not really seeing this and being intentional about a plan to really combat these things that are so pervasive in our time, we're going to be in trouble, aren't we?
Yeah, so I'll give you just an example right now. On this call, my whole computer is set to grayscale, and my wife's smartphone is set to grayscale, and my phone is an all grayscale phone, because when I walk out into the real world, I want the colors of reality to impress me. But if I'm looking at the artificially enhanced colors that they put on the computer screen, it's actually likely to make me that much less impressed with the clothes of my children or the flowers in our backyard. So we have to say no to certain things in order to really appreciate and say yes to the delights of others. And again, to your point, we have to be creative about that. We have to be creative about what do we let go of so that we can be more habitually delighting in everything around us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. And so one other aspect of this is it strikes me that, again, with that simplicity, then those simple truths of what has been revealed, what is right before us, wouldn't be so, they'd be more intelligible, such as like just looking at a crucifix. And there's a bunch of different things we can think about, but if we just thought about just the infinite love of God for us, the goodness of God, how amazing it is what he has done for us, what he's doing, what he continues to do and will do for all eternity, if we allow him to. I mean, it's overwhelming in the beauty that is there. And yet it might not strike us as beautiful. It might not move us in the level of our emotions when it certainly ought to. So I guess as we kind of get more able to receive that, then we would expect that we will have more of an emotional response to these truths when looking at objects that express these truths to us. But even in that, are there certain things that are going to be unique to each person in a certain way that they think about it, a certain word that they use? Like maybe it's not God's infinite love, but maybe to think about what there's nothing he's not willing to do for them, or maybe just phrasing it a little bit differently. Maybe that strikes the heart of that person a little bit differently than somebody else, and they just kind of need to find the right keys for them to really have that expression strike them in the right way. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so now we might get into the definition of beauty that I offer in the book. And I'll give the definition, then talk about one of the parts. So my definition of beauty is a combination of order and surprise. So I think what you're talking about right now is very much the surprise part. Unless you experience some surprise, you will not be moved at the goodness or truth of something. You might recognize it as true or good, but you won't really care. You won't really feel it without surprise. So there are going to be certain words and certain images, certain formulations that have become familiar to us. And so part of the discipline of beauty is when we recognize that a certain word or formulation or picture or image or storybook or whatever is not moving us the way it used to, then actually we have to do the work of looking for a new image, a new formulation, a new word that will surprise us and remind us of how amazing the truths of faith, for instance, really are.
Wow. And isn't this what it seems that our Lord does for us, I would say in Scripture, but also even in private revelation that has continued on? I would say look at the church-approved private revelations that are there, or private devotions that have then been made universal devotions for the church, such as the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and then the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and these beautiful ways to strike us, to surprise us with the beauty of God's love for us and how we are called to receive that love and love him back. We're going to have a bunch more with Dr. John Mark Miravalle and his book on beauty. When we get back, stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Dr. John Mark Miravalle talking about his book, Beauty, what it is and why it matters. You can get it at sophiainstitute.com, sophiainstitute.com. We're talking about those two components of beauty in the last segment, and that's order and surprise, and order and surprise together. And in your chapter on the beauty of nature, you apply them in this way. You say that nature is both orderly and surprising, and therefore it expresses the character of the creator, of God, his intelligence expressed in the orderly character of nature, his freedom expressed in the surprising character of nature. And so you say the beauty of nature consists in precisely this, that it expresses God's intelligence and freedom. And so you conclude that people tend to forget that nature is first and foremost a message to humanity, a mode of communication between us and God. And whenever we attack nature's beauty, we undermine that message. And so we are morally bound to protect and experience beauty manifest in the natural world, which includes preserving natural beauty as an integral part of human surroundings. Just a beautiful passage, outstanding chapter that helps us to understand how God reveals himself in nature to us and how beautiful it all is. Anything else you want to share with us on this topic?
One thing that I've recommended over the last couple of years when I give talks on this now is we talked in a previous segment about needing to be temperate, needing to restrain and self-control. But we've also talked about the need to cultivate delight. So just to throw out one suggestion that I've offered a bunch lately, consider on Fridays going a whole day without video of any kind, of restraining what you see to the movements that are real and not fictional or not just camera-based. Consider that as a kind of mortification for the sake of beauty. And then I would really, to everyone, recommend every Sunday, if you don't have a backyard, if you have a backyard, go in the backyard. If you don't, go somewhere else. Have a hot, wonderful drink and drink it in silence somewhere in nature. Because if you can't appreciate the beauty of nature, if you can't appreciate God's beauty, what beauty can you appreciate? And I think developing that habit is really spiritually very important.
Wow, Dr. John Mark Miravalle is with us talking about his book, Beauty, What It Is and Why It Matters. Again, you can get it at sophiainstitute.com. So good. And yes, thank you for these practical encouragements of actions that we can take. In chapter 4 of your book, Truth and Beauty is the name of the chapter. You write, truth, goodness, and beauty are about more than preferences. They're objective. Teach us about the objective nature of beauty.
So the objective nature of beauty springs mostly from this idea of order, right? Beauty has to have order as well as surprise. Well, order means a thing being the way it's supposed to be and doing what it's supposed to do. So order refers to the way a thing exists objectively and whether it's fulfilling the demands of its own nature. So that's not something that's up for grabs. If a human being is acting perversely, well, then objectively it's out of line. He or she is out of line with his or her own nature. That's not something that is just in the eye of the beholder. That's something that's in the thing. So order is objective. And look, you can look at that. One of my favorite examples of order, because I like it a lot, is chess. And in chess, if you're checkmated, that's not in the eye of the beholder. That's just a fact based on the nature of the game. So whether something is orderly or not is not subjective. It's objective based on what you're talking about.
Awesome. Yeah, let's skip back a chapter actually on chapter 3, order and surprise. And I want to ask you this question. As a husband and father, how do you seek to bring order and surprise to your family? And I guess the deeper question is, what is the vision you hold for that mission? For example, you write about how Aquinas says that two of the elements of beauty are integrity or perfection and proportion or harmony. Our families aren't likely to be 100% perfect or harmonious, but these are targets that we ought to be striving to advance toward. Is that how you look at your mission in family life? And if so, what do you practically do in seeking to advance family life in these ways?
That's a beautiful question. That's a wonderful question. So I do like very much what Chesterton says about living a beautiful life, which is also in the book, that a beautiful life is one that breaks the conventions and keeps the commandments. So I want my kids, God willing, well, he does will, with God's grace, I want them to have the structure of the church's truth and the goodness of the church's moral life. I want them to have a basic, regular habit of prayer. So we do family rosary. We often do daily mass. And I'm trying to get the older kids to make sure they meditate every day. So I want them to have this regularity of prayer. That's all part of the order. Within the surprise, though, man, there's a lot that's up for grabs. What are we doing today? Who are we going to have over? What are we going to read? What are we going to sing? Where are we going to go? And who are you going to become? I mean, that's really the incredible question. So I think the flexibility, and I've read, and I think it's true, that often mothers are better at this than fathers. Fathers are very good about trying to impose order. Mothers tend to be very good about allowing the uniqueness of each child to express itself in original, creative ways, and allowing room. Honestly, it's basically the church's teaching on solidarity and subsidiarity. Solidarity is the order, the integrity of our family. Subsidiarity, let the surprising uniqueness of every individual shine forth. So hopefully that's what we're trying to do in our families.
Wow, this is so good. This is gold. This is so good. Dr. John Mark Miravalle is with us. And so, yeah, correspondingly then, how about in your own personal life? Is it similar? I mean, as the steward of one's self, how does thinking in this way help you to advance?
Yeah, I think seeing the Christian life as creative is so important, because we're Orthodox people, we're traditional people. We know that there is a set of teachings that we must not deviate from. There is a human nature that we must be true to, that the commandments apply to us as they've applied to every human being. So there's a uniformity, there's an order, there's a regularity. But so often I think we can just kind of circle the wagons and get in a rut and repeat ourselves and repeat the basic truths. But the saints are not like that, and I don't want to be like that. I want the Lord to do something new with my life. I want him to do something surprising. I want him to do something creative. If I write something, I want it to be something, God willing, that people say, oh, you know what? I hadn't thought of that. That's great. That's new. That's interesting. So just to know that the life of sanctity and the life of Christ is surprising, is original, is creative, as well as being orderly, that's really encouraging. Because, look, I'm a bald guy in my 40s who drives a minivan. It's easy for me to think that my life is boring. That's maybe how the secular world would present it. And to remember, no, this is beautiful. This is unique. There's never been a life like mine in the whole history of the world. And that's why the Lord made me. And I still have some interesting stuff to do and some cool stuff to do and some new stuff to do. That keeps me fired up for being a dad and being a Christian.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, but you have to break those conventions of the world, like you mentioned from Chesterton. You got to break those standards of the world, because if you went by the conventions of the world, by the world standards, you're right. You would not hold up too well. I would not hold up too well. But if we see it the way it truly is, then yeah, thanks be to God. Praise God and thanks be to God. We are so incredibly blessed, and there's nowhere else I'd rather be than right in the middle of all that comes with my vocation and striving to live it to the full. And so yeah, there really is a way of seeing that we need to cultivate. And then again, by God's grace, the sacramental life, we can really then have grace poured upon all of this. Grace builds upon nature. And really have it a sort of sanctified vision on top of it. Anything, this might be getting into other aspects of the book, later aspects, but anything you want to say about that, just about God's grace being poured upon having the natural understanding of having things right in the mind in terms of how this all works.
Oh yeah, listen, once you see, okay, what we need is order and we need surprise. I mean, to me, then the whole Christian life just just explodes. It's like, wow, look how perfect the Eucharist is, right? Just to take one easy example. Look how perfect it is. Look how the Lord sets it up from the Old Testament, the blood of the lamb of sacrifice, the blood of the covenant, and then it's finally realized in the Eucharist. Wow, look at that order, look at that lineup. But then look at how Moses does that blood ritual, and he throws the cow's blood on the Israelites, and it's like he's making a blood covenant. He's like, hey, we're blood now, we're family, I'm your father, you're my children. But it's just a symbol. So then what does Jesus do? Jesus, he becomes a mammal. God becomes a mammal so that he can actually get some blood, and then he figures out a distribution mechanism so he can get his blood into our blood so that we can actually be related by blood, not symbolically, but really to God. And I get to teach the seminarians who are practicing to be the blood transfusion technicians to make humanity related by blood to God. Like that's yeah, you can see it's orderly, but it's so surprising you can't believe it. So if that's what you look for in the faith, yeah, then you realize that nothing like our faith is beautiful. Nothing as beautiful as our faith.
Yeah, and then if we see it this way, and we are living it with this vision, then what does that do to our ability to be able to transmit the faith, to be able to hand it on? Obviously, we're going to be better at doing that because we're actually seeing the thing more as it truly is, and then really entering into it more as it really is. And so all of that is going to be fruitful, and that's going to be fruitful for us, but also to those that are going to be interacting with us, especially those that are entrusted to our care. Any final thoughts on this before we hit the break?
Yeah, I really believe that orderly and surprising is the way we are supposed to present the faith. And unfortunately, sometimes you'll hear homilies or testimonies or talks that are neither orderly nor surprising. They're a jumbled mess of cliches. And I think that does a great disservice to the faith. I think we owe it to Christ, and we owe it to the people that he wants us to try to help convert, to be organized and fresh, to give the truth in its fullness in a way that shows that we've spent some time thinking about how to structure our presentation, but also to do it in a new way so that it doesn't just seem like the same old thing. That's really hard. Chesterton calls it standing on your head. He says that a paradox is truth standing on its head to get people's attention. And that takes a lot of work to learn how to stand on your head. So I think we have to be willing to work really hard to be organized and creative. And then people will see not only that it's true, but that it's delightful.
Yeah, we are so blessed to have Dr. John Mark Miravalle with us. Again, the book Beauty, What It Is and Why It Matters, SophiaInstitute.com is where you can find it very easily, SophiaInstitute.com. We're going to be back with much more, but just so grateful that we are being able to have this interview today with Dr. John Mark Miravalle. I'm sure you're grateful as well. Let me just get into this little bit in the book as we're about to hit the break. It's just so good. Christianity is a view about the world. And if that view is true, if the world is the way our faith says it is, then a life that doesn't correspond to Christianity is a life that doesn't correspond to reality, and that's the definition of living in a fantasy world. Some people may want to live that way, and they may find some pleasure in living that way, but most people know that living in a fantasy world isn't happiness. Delusion isn't happiness. Beautiful stuff. We're going to be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Dr. John Mark Miravalle talking about his book, Beauty, What It Is and Why It Matters. You can get it at SophiaInstitute.com. Ready for a big finish here in the final segment. Chapter 5, Temptations Away from Beauty. You write the temptation to pursue surprise without order, which is disorder, and the temptation to pursue order without surprise, which you call banality. Talk to us about this, the temptation of doing one without the other.
So it's hard, as we've said. It takes a lot of work, really, to continue being surprised at the order in things, at the deeper rightness and truth and goodness in things. So, for instance, I don't really know much about baseball, so it's hard for me to be surprised at baseball because I don't know enough about it. I know the basic rules, but I don't know enough to really appreciate it. But people who've been watching baseball all their lives are continually surprised and delighted by baseball. I guess baseball aficionados will often say, wow, I've been watching this game my whole life, never saw anything like that. And I won't get it. So you have to do work. You have to invest in something. You have to invest in something to really appreciate it and be continuously surprised at it. Okay, instead of investing, for some people, it's just easier to break beauty into two parts and to take the order part and just get into a routine. And that's kind of ugly. That can be ugly when you just thoughtlessly repeat yourself over and over again, almost like a senile person. That's not nice. That's ugly. On the other hand, there's the isolation of surprise from order, where you just take the surprise part and you just want to be shocked. And that's real dark because that's subject to the law of diminishing returns. So if you just look for the shock value of things, then you need to shock yourself worse the next time and worse the next time. And all the time you're being shocked at what's more and more and more perverse, more disordered. You see this with tastes in horror movies. You certainly see it in pornography. And that's really awful. That's a really horrible trail to go down. That's really the trail of hell, because eventually you're desperately looking for pleasure from something more hideous than anything you've ever seen. And I would say that, right, if you have this banality, this cliche routine that doesn't give you any pleasure, it's just sort of a habitual thing. And on the other hand, you have this love of disorder. Well, that's how a lot of Americans, a lot of moderns are living their life. They go to work and it feels like a banal cliche and a routine without meaning or surprise or interest. And then they go home and they Netflix binge on something disordered, be it, unpleasant news or some sort of twisted reality show or pornography. So we really are living, many of us, lives where we've fragmented beauty and are living just bouncing back and forth between one form of ugliness and the other.
Yeah, very important. I just want to encourage everybody to get this book, dive into it for yourself. There's only so much we can get into here, but having the book, being able to read it, slowly reflect on these things is going to be very, very helpful for you. Again, SophiaInstitute.com. The book is Beauty, What It Is and Why It Matters, SophiaInstitute.com. And, yeah, let's go even back to the acknowledgments in your book. And you write about how seeing your wife and children delights you more than all the other sights in the world put together. I think this is worth quoting. You say, beauty is that which delights when seen, and seeing you and your mother delights me more than all the other sights in the world put together. So just something incredibly beautiful about that line as well, because we can all relate to the truth of that and the fact that, look, this beauty of one's vocation, of the people that you're in this with, your wife, your children, more beautiful than the greatest art, the greatest architecture, the greatest nature, even, etc. As you write in chapter 6 about the beauty of the human form, the body is the most beautiful physical thing there is. And so I guess the first question on this is about the priorities of beauty, because you give a certain warning in the book too. You say, warning in advance, you can't be concerned with beauty in every respect at every moment. In particular, when you're trying to pursue one kind of beauty, you'll probably have to neglect a different kind of beauty. And you give a great example there in the book, but I also want to point to this priority to a moral beauty and a spiritual beauty, to moral beauty and spiritual beauty, that priority, because in this example, you can say that parents who are cultivating a beautiful garden in the backyard, but then they neglect the moral and the spiritual formation of their children. So they're on it in the lower form of the beauty, and they're off in the higher form. Talk to us about that priority.
Yeah, as you said earlier, different people are going to have different sensitivities to different forms of beauty, and that should largely be determined by our state in life. So I'm very blessed. I'm like you. My state in life demands that I invest. And we said already that you can only appreciate what you've invested in a beautiful way. I am invested in my wife and kids. That's what my state in life demands. Unfortunately, that's an extraordinarily high form of beauty. So I'm not going to be able to invest in bagpipes as much. right? Or a cello, which is fine. Those are great forms to invest in. But if I invested in those to the distraction of these higher forms of beauty to which I'm called, that would be a real loss for everybody, but especially for me. So to every Christian is fundamentally required to invest in recognizing the orderly, the rightness, and the surprising character of God himself. That's the incredible thing, is that Christ has come now so that we can see our face. He's told us the ultimate truths about God himself, so we can recognize his orderly and surprising character. So part of the demand of appreciating the good and the true in beauty means prioritizing the beauty and therefore the truth and goodness that we are primarily called to. First of all, God for all of us, and secondly, as determined by our state in life. And boy, if we do that, if we invest deeply in those forms of beauty, the divine, the spousal, the parental, and then the charitable towards neighbor, as our state in life demands, man, are we going to have a good life? I tell you what, tomorrow's my anniversary, 18 years. I cannot understand. I cannot believe how much better it keeps getting. I am continuously surprised by how good it is and how it just keeps getting better. And that's supposed to be the Christian life.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know how many times I can just say, awesome, this is so good. We are just so blessed to have this interview today and to hear from Dr. John Mark Miravalle. Again, so grateful for you and your work. I want to close it up on this as you talk about the need to invest, and that's where the fruits are coming from. As you talk about that, congratulations on your wedding anniversary, the anniversary of your marriage and your family, by the way. But in bringing this then to the Eucharist, right, and all of this put together, right, the need to invest, as we're talking about, and the beauty that is before us there in the Holy Eucharist, that Jesus himself, the second person of the Holy Trinity, takes on flesh, takes on a human body, and then there he is in the Eucharist, truly there, present, body, blood, soul, and divinity. There he is, Jesus, who is God, but veiled to our physical senses. So even drawing us into needing to make an even greater investment, an investment of faith. What can you say to round it out here for us on the Holy Eucharist?
Yeah, real quick. Jesus wants to be with us so much that he has not only become one of us, but he has presented himself to us in the form of an inanimate object. Because with every other human being, we can say something like, hey, you're probably busy. I'm sorry if I'm imposing. I know you have other things to do, other places to be. But Jesus has come to us in the Eucharist so that there's no way for us to make any of those excuses. We know he's just right there. He's not doing anything else. He's not going anywhere else. He has come in the form, in the disguise of an inanimate object so that he can be radically available. And we know that there is no excuse for not going. How can we not be surprised?
He's Dr. John Mark